The next speaker is Laurel Lamont, to be followed by Melissa Bourbonnais.
Welcome.
Hi. All right, so I'm a proponent for you guys getting a larger stipend if you do the job. But if you're just pushing out city staff's agenda and you're not taking the time to get to know the constituency, what are we paying you for? We're paying city staff. So, I mean, I've asked Zach, we've had conversations in the past, long before we had a Jessica on the board, and I said, when are we gonna bring housing to the agenda? And you said, I'm one of five. It's called leadership. We step up. But if you're not gonna step up, why are we gonna give you a bigger salary, stipend, whatever you wanna call it? We do not have lived experience up there. And so I'm a bigger proponent for an increased salary, so hopefully somebody of the workforce will run for those seats and we can get fair representation and we can start talking about housing and what affects the constituency. And we can get you to actually come talk to us. And you can spend time actually doing something outside of just pushing your city staff's message. Do some homework. Question their work, because we have segregation in this town. There's an affordable housing overlay zone. We put most of the affordable housing on the other side of the freeway where there's no schools or parks. In an industrial complex. We don't vote against postponing SB 9 because you're really a supporter of city staff. Curtis Brown, it wasn't within the city council's purview to talk about housing, to address housing. Why do you think state takes the overreach? Because cities have not been holding up their end of the bargain. They have not been doing their job. City council should be doing a job and not just leaning on city staff, because city staff has its own agenda. And it's to make money on the front end so they don't have to deal with issues on the back end. But this city will eventually run at a deficit. Eventually, all cities will. Because you're designed to make money now, so you don't have, until you're not here anymore, until city staff isn't here anymore and it's somebody else's problem. It's designed so the workforce isn't your constituency. How convenient is that? Design better. Question the work of city staff and their agenda. Reach out to the constituency.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Melissa Bourbonnais, to be followed by Rebecca Beard.
Welcome.
Hello? Okay. Can you hear me? I am Melissa Bourbonnais, and I would like to contribute to the discussion related to this item. I also very much support the idea of council members getting a raise. If you're doing your job as you were elected to do, if you are doing your job according to the oath that you took, then it's more than a full-time job. And you deserve to be compensated, as all of us deserve to be compensated when we work hard, when we work. But it doesn't seem to me, and I've been showing up, or at least watching, I've been showing up for 3 years now. As you all know, Laurel has been showing up for 7. And we have been doing a lot of work behind the scenes that for some reason, as a whole, you don't seem interested in doing. I'm going to remind you of your oath. You took an oath along the lines of, I do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States. Well, by the way, the Constitution of the United States has an equal protection clause in it. And it means that you need to treat us equally and not discriminate whether we have a difference of opinion, different religion, different sexual orientation, different anything. The U.S. Constitution provides for equal protection under the law. So does the state constitution. And you took an oath to support the Constitution of the U.S. and the Constitution of the state of California. and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of the office to the best of my ability. Temecula is a city with roughly 112,000 people. I'm going to guess that that means every district you have roughly 22,000 people in your district. I want to know, if you're going to get a raise, what does your district think? What do your constituents think? Because I can guarantee the working class, the local economic workforce, they're not here tonight. Well, a couple are, which is cool, but for the most part, they're not here tonight because they're at work, because they're taking care of their children, because they're helping their kids with homework, because they're making dinner. They're not here, but we're not a theocracy. The U.S. Constitution that you pledge to uphold doesn't establish a theocracy, which a theocracy is when government is ran by God. But a democracy is government by the people. It's self-government. And in this case, you're a representative democracy. Those 22,000 people, give or take, whether they voted or not. And you should all vote, by the way. Tell your friends to vote. Those 22,000 people, whether they vote or not, whether they're here or not, because again, most people are at work. It's only the nerds that are here. And the masses are cool. Not, they're watching TikTok and stuff. They're not here. But they still deserve representation. And that is your job. That is the oath that you took. They can't be here, so you are to represent them. What do they think about the proclamation? What do they think about a pay raise? What do they think about housing? And the fact that most people that work full-time in those important essential jobs can't afford a home. And so because they can't afford a home and they can't afford to live in the city that they serve, they commute. Well, that affects traffic, that affects pollution. What do your constituents think about that? When have you asked them? Because you can't just listen to the people here, which the people here, good job for being here, but you can't just listen to them. 22,000 per district. What do they think? What do they want? What's important to them? Councilperson Alexander, what's important to them? Is it that you take the Stonewall Rebellion out of the proclamation? I don't know that that's important to them. Maybe it's mental health. Maybe it's their parents being home because they're not on the freeway traveling for an hour and a half or 2 hours to get home from work because they can't afford to live here. So they work here and then they commute elsewhere. What about $6 a gallon for gas? What about that? Do they care about those things? I can't speak for all 112,000 people in Temecula, but I would suspect they do. And I have a feeling you haven't checked, you haven't asked, and half of you don't even have social media that we can access because God forbid somebody hurts your feelings.
Thank you. Next speaker.
And I keep hearing that the corruption, the political corruption, I think we're misconstruing national politics with local politics. I understand the insider trading, the massive corruption that goes on with lifetime senators and assembly members and all that. When their salaries are $190,000 but they're worth $112 million, that is something different than the $100 we're paying a local commission. And if we up it to say even 200, we haven't come up with a number, but say we up it to 200, there's no more corruption from 100 than there is 200. We're misconstruing these ideas of national lifetime politician corruption to what is going on here in our city. And I encourage anyone that thinks these numbers are too much for city council, too much for our commissioners, to run for these positions. Run for these positions, sit in these seats, and then tell us or tell your constituents at that time, I make too much money, I'm lowering my own salary. I encourage you all to do that. Thank you.
Is it inappropriate if I clap for you?
Yeah.
Melissa, and then Julie Gary.
Welcome.
Hello. Let me start with the Stonewall Rebellion. Words are important. They do matter. June of 2019, the New York commissioner, the NYPD commissioner, James O'Neill, rendered a formal apology for the actions of officers at Stonewall. It's accepted today that the police officers acted in a corrupt way. They were often accepting bribes from the mafia, and the mafia owned the Stonewall Inn. And it's established that they were mistreating the gay community. I don't think that's something that we need to take issue with. I think that's something that if the constituents, the LGBTQ constituents want that recognition for that uprising, and it was not just an uprising against blatant discrimination and oppression, but it was actually an uprising against the mafia as well, because the mafia was taking advantage of the circumstances to profit and paying off cops to let them get away with breaking the law. And some of those laws at the time in New York prohibited gay individuals from being served alcohol, gay couples from dancing. Some of the laws on the books at the time in New York would empower police officers to arrest anybody, that didn't have at least 3 articles of gender-appropriate clothes on. So I understand that it is a great victory and something to be proud of. And if the community wants it in their proclamation, then particularly if that community is part of your constituency, not necessarily a church, but your constituency, then it's something that you should honor. You took an oath not to represent God, because that would be a theocracy, and we're under a democracy. You took an oath to represent your constituents in the city of Temecula. That's who you're supposed to represent. Part of being under a democracy is what preserves our religious freedom. I don't know if you realize that, but the First Amendment preserves our religious freedom. I am a woman of faith. It's very important to me. It's more important to my politics. And anybody who knows me a little bit knows that I love my politics. But it comes first. So I very much embrace the First Amendment and the concept of separation of church and state. I understand that word is not in the First Amendment. I know my Constitution and my Bill of Rights, but the concept is there. And Thomas Jefferson was a proponent of separation of church and state. And I know Christians tend to love Thomas Jefferson and the framers that put together the Constitution that members of the City Council have been sworn to uphold, the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution. And when we live within a democracy that honors separation of church and state, that means I get to, in the best way possible, in the most protected way possible, worship my Lord, worship my God. And that's something that I want to preserve. That's something that church members should want to preserve, because what happens if we set this precedent of a theocracy? What happens when we start to get Mormons elected to city council? What happens when it's Jehovah's Witness? What happens when it's Muslims? What about then Christians? I would ask Christians, politically engaged Christians. What happens when you set, because I'm not going to associate myself with that kind of Christian, but what happens when you set, because again, we're not a theocracy, if you read the Constitution, you set a precedent of legislating based on your Bible, your views, and then we get a Muslim elected to office that wants to do the same thing, or any other religion, then you would be up here calling that evil as well. And I almost feel like defending you, Mayor. I'm going to remind, because I only have 30 seconds left, I'm going to remind you that you have to honor the Equal Protection Clause of both the U.S. and the state constitution. And if you are fiscally responsible, you're going to want to do that and not discriminate against the gay community, not target them, because otherwise you're setting yourselves up for a lawsuit. And I also want to remind you that it's not in 1 Corinthians 5, 12, 13, what business of it is mine to judge those outside the church? Christians, what business of it is of yours to judge outside the church?
The next speaker is Laurel Lamont, to be followed by Bob Quaid.
Good evening.
Okay, I'm going to circle back to, remember you're one of 5? We have spent a lot of time in this room talking about something when one person is pushing an agenda from a pastor. I've been here for 7 years trying to talk about housing, but nobody can bring that to an agenda? Where do all the LGBTQ plus community go when their extreme families ostracize them? We don't have housing. When are we going to come back to that? When are we going to start bringing other things to the agenda instead of letting Jessica run the show and make theater? Quality of life matters. Housing affects every constituent. Why can't we talk about that? It's an inclusive discussion, but we don't talk about it, but she can keep spewing her agenda. Why? When? I know we don't get along because you want to tout traffic and safety and all these things when you're running for your council position. But nobody talks about how we got traffic problems in the first place. Zoning and city planning created housing for commuters. Homeowners commute out and workforce commutes in. That's a convenient setup so you don't have to represent the workforce. Housing matters. This theater does not and shouldn't have a place here, but we keep catering to it. We keep allowing it. Are we going to counterbalance it with some city work? Is that going to happen at some point? Or are we just going to keep platforming her and making a mockery of this? Stop allowing a puppeteer to control this show. And maybe, Curtis, you just entertain the idea that I understand and know what I'm talking about when I talk about housing, when I talk about traffic. You want to talk about fiscal conservative? That term we love to throw around. Roads, the wider we make them, the more it's going to cost to maintain them. The cities were designed to exclude the workforce and to segregate communities. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about where a whole, look, what we're seeking, what an LGBT, I'm an ally. I'm not somebody who comes in, because my fight is housing. But we're seeking safety and acceptance. But we're gonna bring a flag issue, which was a non-issue, and make it an issue. Housing's been an issue. When is that going to be a fair and acceptable thing to discuss? When are you going to be brave enough to bring that to the table? I know you're looking at my seconds. When is it going to run out? Housing, 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 housing. It affects everyone. Talk about it. Do something about it.
Thank you. Next speaker.
The